everybody, it's Olive, here to do a book haul. I haven't done one of these in a long time, but of course I've still been buying books because I have no self-control. Most of these books came from library book sales. The two books that I was probably the most excited to get were the two books that I did not have of Tana French's Dublin Murder Squad series. This is obviously Faithful Place, which is number 3, and Broken Harbor, which is number 4. I've already read 1 and 2, and I had already owned number 5. So I was so happy to see these at a library book sale for like $1 each. So now I have the full collection, of course, until she publishes another one. The next book I found at a library book sale is Let the Great World Spin by Colin McCann. I have heard Hannah Hart of Hearto discuss this book. If you don't know her channel and have never watched My Drunk Kitchen, I feel very sorry for you, and I will put the link down to her channel below. I'm actually in one of her videos. She did a volunteer tour called Hello Hearto, I think it was maybe 2 years back, and came to my city and filmed a video about the tour in my city, and for some reason my husband and I were asked to be on camera, so I'll put a link to that below if you're interested in watching it. She was a very big fan of this book, so of course I was interested in picking it up. This takes place in New York City in 1974. There is a tightrope walker who is running, jumping, dancing between the Twin Towers. Everyone is kind of looking up at him, and it seems as though we're going to see the stories of different New Yorkers during this time period and how they're all connected by all seeing him doing what he's doing at one time. I'm very excited to see what it's all about. The next book I picked up was The Sparrow by Mary Doria Russell. Rebecca Shinsky at Book Riot speaks so highly of this one, and I really trust her taste. This is about a group of people who are sent to a new planet to communicate with the native species there, and nothing is known about it. That alone is very interesting, but it seems as though it's going to have some political and some religious elements, and obviously some sci-fi in there as well. I think that's such an interesting combination, and I'm really interested in reading this one. The next book is The Coffee Trader by David Liss. This takes place in 17th century Amsterdam, shortly after the creation of the first commodities exchange. And this follows one merchant who has lost everything, and in order to get his wealth and status back, he teams up with a Dutch woman trading the new, then unknown commodity called coffee. So it should be a really interesting read. The next book I bought is The Rathbones by Janice Clark. I don't know a lot about this one besides that it's about a family of whale spotters who's down to one member after a series of failures. It doesn't have fantastic reviews on Goodreads, but the blurb, as you might be able to see at the top if I bring it a little bit closer here, is by Erin Morgenstern, who is the author of The Night Circus. I really trust her recommendations, since the last book I read off of a recommendation by her was The Enchanted by Renee Denfeld, which was a fantastic book and right up my alley. So if her tastes are anything like mine and she liked this book, then I'm in for a treat. The last book I bought at this particular library book sale is called Consolation by Michael Redhill. This book takes place in Toronto, which of course really interested me since I just took a trip to Toronto at the end of last year and loved it there and can't wait to go back. This book is about a historian who's on the hunt for a shipwreck that contains glass negatives of some of the first early photographs of Toronto. Sounds really interesting. The next book I pre-ordered, and that is the second volume of Ms. Marvel. This one's called Generation Y. I'm extremely excited for this one. I received the first volume of Ms. Marvel in the Book Riot Quarterly box, not this past one, but the one before. And I gobbled it up. I absolutely loved it, so of course I had to pre-order this one. These next 3 I got from my local used bookstore. The first is The Girl with the Glass Feet by Ali Shaw. I don't know a ton about this story, but I do know that it involves magical creatures in a snowy forest and a girl who is slowly turning into glass. So some magical realism. It sounds really cool. I think I'm going to save this one for winter because, of course, you know I love to read seasonally, and this seems like it would be perfect to read when it's snowing. The next book I bought is Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clark. This one is so heavy. Of course, as I said before, and I'm sure I've said in previous videos, and will continue to say, I love the Night Circus, and this has some magical elements and a little bit of a competition, I think, going on in it as well, which is right up my alley. Plus, I just loved this copy of it. If you can see, it's kind of worn on the edges and on the back. I thought it was so beautiful. It almost seems like it was meant to be that way, like the publishers intended it to be. Obviously it's not, since this is a used copy, and you can tell by the way it's fraying that I don't think it was meant to look like this. But that, and I'm not typically a big fan of the deckled edge, but I think it kind of works with the wear on the book. I don't know, I just thought it was so beautiful and I wanted to pick this up, and I know if I picked this up from the library and tried to get through it, I would have to renew it about 12 times. So I thought owning my own copy was the best bet. The next book that I just could not pass up from my used bookstore is St. Petersburg by Andrei Bieli. This is obviously a very old book. It was published in 1965. And not only is this my favorite city in the entire world, St. Petersburg, Russia, but I love old books, especially old books about Russia. And on the inside, there is an old article from the New Yorker in 1978 that talks about this book. It says that this book was ranked by Vladimir Nabokov as his third most influential book. He ranked this third behind Metamorphosis and Ulysses, and he rated it above Proust in being the most influential to him. I thought that was fascinating. Any book that Nabokov thinks is that important is definitely something I think I need to pick up, especially since I've never heard of it before and just saw it in my bookstore. This takes place obviously in St. Petersburg in 1905, which if you're a Russian history junkie like me, you'll know that that's the year of the failed revolution. If you're not a Russian history junkie, then you're welcome for the information. I am thrilled to own a copy of this, and I am going to be thrilled to read it, and of course I'm going to have to be very gentle with it since it's old and needs to be respected. And then I was just at another library book sale, of course, just the other day, and while I was browsing through the nonfiction section, I looked under the table where they keep those big boxes of books that they have yet to put up on the tables to view, that I'm always looking through to see what's under there. And as luck would have it, there was a giant box filled with Russian language materials, things relating to Russia, and I hit the jackpot. Most of the stuff in there, of course, were Russian dictionaries, and I have about 1,000 of those. But I did get a dictionary of spoken Russian, 2 Russian readers, and Eugene Onegin, or Yevgeny Onegin, by Alexander Pushkin. The last thing I got was Molotovs Magic Lantern by Rachel Polanski. This is such a cool sounding book. I've known about it for a while and was so excited to see it at the book sale. In this book, Rachel, the author, is the main character, and it obviously follows a fictional account of her living in Moscow in Molotov, who was one of the orchestrators of Stalin's Great Purges. She's living in his old apartment, and he was a famous bibliophile and has lots and lots of Russian literature on his shelves. And in his old apartment, she finds a magic lantern that will take her into these books and to the times and places and with the people that exist in these famous works of Russian literature. So it's kind of like a journey through Russian literature, and you get to see different parts of Russia and get to meet the Russian people at these times. And that sounds so exciting, especially since I don't know a ton about Russian literature, and so I think this will give me a little bit of insight, plus I'm sure inspire me to read a lot more Russian literature. Although I was thrilled to find this at the library book sale, I would have been very happy to purchase this new. I doubt many people who watch my videos will know about the controversy that happened surrounding the publication of this book in kind of the Russian history writing community. It's a very small community, which is why I say I'm not quite sure a lot of people will know what I'm talking about. But when this book was published, it received an interesting negative review from a reviewer whose name was not quite subtle enough to not give away who was writing it. Not only did this reviewer write very, very negative things about this book, but also about another book, I'm forgetting which one at the moment, by Robert Service, who's another famous Russian historian. The author who wrote these negative reviews is another author and professor of Russian history who wrote some very famous works that have also been criticized sometimes for their accuracy. And his name is Orlando Figes. There was a huge debacle after Figes, with a not clever at all username, it had Orlando in it, wrote really negative reviews, and a journalist caught on to it and started to call him out for it publicly, at which point Figes, of course denying it at the time, started to threaten libel. I forget exactly how it was discovered it was him. I will try to find this article that I read all this information at and post it down below in case you're interested. But there was one damning piece of evidence that pointed to it being him who was writing all these reviews. At which point he backtracked and said, well, my wife wrote them and I'm just finding out about it now. And then when he was under a little bit more pressure, he finally admitted, yeah, it was me. It's like something that would happen in a novel, ironically enough, that a very, very famous Russian writer and very famous Russian professor, very well respected, would be caught doing something as petty as this. So I am planning on reading this book later in the year. I do have, I think, one of his other books, and I have read another book of his on the Russian Revolution. But not only does that make me think a little bit less of him, that whole scandal, but his work has been criticized for containing some historical inaccuracies. In fact, the Russian government prevented one of his books from being translated into Russian and sold in Russia because they felt it strayed too far from the truth. So just a little tidbit of information. Of course, when I read this one, I'm going to be reading it with a giant question mark as to whether or not what I'm reading is entirely true. But then again, I'm always trying to read critically, so it'll just be another exercise in that, I guess. So after that fun little story of controversy within the Russian history community, who thought I'd ever say something like that, those were the books that I've purchased in the past couple of months. I now have to struggle to find space for them on my shelf. If you've read any of these books or want to read any of these books or want to comment on how ridiculous that scandal is, please leave a comment down below. As always, you can also find me on Twitter and Instagram, both places at @abookolive, and the link to my Goodreads is down below. I will see you next time. Bye.